Living your life for God and prioritizing Him in your marriage can be uncomfortable, and it goes against the current of today's world.
So we created a podcast to talk practically about our marriage and family, because we may make a plan, but God is the one who directs our steps.
And that has led us here to Radical Direction. The following podcast is a ministry production of The Sevenfold. To find out more, go to thesevenfold.com. Welcome back to Radical Direction, everyone. My name is Virginia Price.
My name is Jacob Price.
And if you have not been here, then welcome to the show. We want to say thank you to everybody who has listened to our trailer. At the time of this recording, our trailer is released, and we had just released episode 1, and the feedback has been really, really great. You guys are excited for the show, and we are just so pumped up by that. Seeing you guys, the people who are local to us, and, seeing you at church and saying, like, you're so pumped for it. People online giving their love and your support, sharing our stories, sharing our stuff. Like, it really means the world to us. We want to impact a lot of people and a lot of marriages. And, we're just two people who are trying to do what the Lord told us to do. Mm. And so your support means so much to us. So thank you very, very much. It's just an honor to.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
So what are we talking about, Jacob? What are we going to get into now that this is going to be our second episode? We're like a real show now.
Uh-huh. We are talking about the fact that there are some things that don't come to the surface until you're married.
Yeah, and there's a lot of cleaning up that people try to do before they get married. And as they're entering their marriage, they're trying to clean themselves up. They're trying to get themselves right. They're trying to get rid of some bad habits and stuff before they get married. But there's a lot of things that we just don't even know is there until we're married, until we're yoked with someone, until we're doing life with somebody. And then it shows up. Mm-hmm. And then there are some things that we just can't clean up before we get married, and we actually need the marriage process to purify us, basically. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of sanctification is the church word for it. But it's a big deal, right? It's a big deal for us to live our life with someone and do life with someone when you're married in that intimate covenant relationship, and then lean into it and allow all the things that are going on to change you for the better and get rid of old habits. And so we want to dive into all of that because, there's a lot of countercultural stuff that talks about, I thought that I could fix him. I thought I could change her. And, she's so close to being my perfect woman. And I just needed to, and it's no.
I'll convert them.
I'll convert them to be my perfect spouse. And really, it's okay, well, what the focus really should be is what is the junk that's in you that God can use your marriage to your spouse to work out of you. And that's that purification, that sanctification that's getting us to a place where we are more righteous with our spouse, right? So that's what we want to talk about in today's episode. And before we get too deep into the episode, I did want to say that we are going to be talking about some sensitive, mature topics, if you will, this episode. Nothing obscene, nothing vulgar, no cussing or anything like that, but just there are some things in marriage and relationships that are just maybe not suitable for younger audiences. So if you have your kids in the car or you're doing something like that, maybe put your headphones, AirPods in, whatever, for certain parts of this episode. We do plan on, if we ever talk about anything like that, that's just maybe a little bit more sensitive, that you don't want to have that conversation with your kids yet, then we will, of course, preface every episode that has that relevant content in it at the start of the episode, so and you're aware. We are going to always try to be tactful and very mindful of what we say and what we share. However, there are sensitive topics that we feel are very important to discuss with marriage in particular. And just know that every episode we intend to be a family-friendly podcast, that you would not be concerned if you were just doing the dishes and your kid walked in or, whatever. That is our goal for sure. There is a level of maturity to this particular episode, and you will always know that. When we started our shows.
Marriage is a mature topic.
Yes, and it's not for the faint of heart.
No.
All right, so Jake, what do you want to say about this first point here?
So you can't perfectly clean yourself or your spouse up right, before you get marriage. And that shouldn't be the intent, right? There is ground that you can lay, such as premarital counseling, that helps aid in understanding where your spouse is coming from and some of the expectations and decisions that you will have to make in marriage, but it's not going to cover everything. And some of that stuff is only going to come out in marriage.
Yeah, and when you're leading into marriage, you're usually very self-focused. You're really thinking about yourself and your how are you going to handle certain situations, and your excitement over certain things, and it's very you focused. And even in the excitement and the joy of getting married, you're still thinking about yourself. You're thinking about your own expectations, your own desires, your own feelings, your own hopes, and all those things. And so it definitely helps to have an outside third party that's like bringing some things to the light, because it forces you to think about your spouse, and it forces you to view them as their own person. And, one of the things that I was told when we were getting married is that, God's not only my father. He loves me. He cares about me. I'm his daughter. He wants the best for me, and he's looking out for me, right? And that's all you think about when you're single, because it is you. But God is also your spouse's father, which means that God's not only your father, but he's your father-in-law. And so he loves your spouse just as much as he loves you. And from my perspective, my husband is God's son. And that he's my dad, but he's, God's son is my husband. And so there's that element where it really shifts the mindset. I didn't get it when we first were in premarital counseling, and that person told me that, like, yeah, but he's her father-in-law. Like, I didn't get that until way later, after we had been married for years. Because then it hit, like, first of all, I had a way better understanding of the dynamics of parents-in-law, and that whole dynamic when you get married. But also it's like, it's so not self-focused. It is this creator loves my spouse so passionately. And so it really shifts the mindset away from me, to you, like your needs, your desires, just you and what you need and how I can best support you.
Yeah, serving one another in love.
Yeah. One of the things that we wanted to hit really hard with this one, this topic about not cleaning yourself up, is because, or not being able to clean yourself up fully, is because the fact that we have habits that are not godly habits, that can be, that don't reveal themselves until you're in this kind of intimate relationship with somebody. You can have you can think that your life is good, you're chugging along, things are great, and you don't really have a lot of friction. But marriage will bring friction into every aspect of your life. And, friction can be good, but also it is something that we have to come at with the attitude of like, yeah, this might be uncomfortable, but it's uncomfortable for my good. And one of the things that I wanted to share, and this is a very personal story, but it's just so indicative, and it shows such a great example of like, you don't know what's a problem until you are in this relationship, this intimate relationship. So Jacob and I had, a very rough, we were engaged for an entire year, and it was a really hard year. We were learning a lot of things about each other. We were learning a lot of things about just like how to be a decent Christian, honestly. We were both newly saved, but Jacob had been saved for a couple of years, whereas I was like brand spanking newly saved. And then he was teaching me like fundamental Christian principles, like fundamental things, like this is a tithe, and this is how you tithe and why you should tithe. And like Jacob was a really great teacher for me in those early days of like really helping to understand just like fundamental stuff, because of course, like I was eager to learn and listen from him. This guy was going to be my husband, but it did not make it easy. And so one of the things that came to a head was that way before I got saved, in a different life, so to speak, I used to smoke cigarettes, and I probably did it for about a year, but it was always in response to stress. It was always a stress management tool. It started off as a social thing, but my life at that period of time was kind of stressful. I had a really great job, and I really loved my job life, but as a student, it was really difficult. I was away from home. There's a lot of things in my life, especially my personal life as well, that were really difficult for me. And so I started smoking mainly as a tool for it. It became a tool that I used for stress management. I also had some unhealthy habits in the personal variety. That is there a way that I can talk about this without actually saying the word? I don't want to say the word.
Personal stress relievers.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Intimate personal stress relievers. I'll just leave it at that, and I'm sure you'll catch on to what that means. And I honestly didn't even know that was a problem. Like, I didn't know that was a no-no area, that you're not supposed to do that as a Christian. And I got saved, and very quickly Jesus spoke to me, and he was like, hey, we don't do that. Like, that's not okay. These personal moments are for your husband in the future. They're not for you to fulfill. And so, like, this is a no-go. And I genuinely just was flabbergasted. I had no idea, because I was going from someone who is in my early 20s, completely immersed in the absolute worldly culture, like believing everything that everyone does is great. And then literally in my, early to mid 20s, running into this wall of Jesus, and this is confronting everything that I thought that I knew. And I'm having to relearn how to be a human now, apparently. Yeah. And so thankfully, praise the Lord. And maybe that's where the radical obedience started. Jesus told me the one time, and I never, ever dabbled back into that thing ever again. But those were habits that I had built that helped me to relieve stress. And so then enter this really hectic and hard first year of engagement, where I was fighting with my parents who didn't want me to get married. They thought Christianity was just like a fad for me personally. And, I don't blame them. I have a lot of impulsive activity in my past. And honestly, I don't blame them. Like, if I was a parent and my kids were doing the things that I did, I would probably just be as skeptical coming from where they are. But, I was trying to do the right thing, and I was trying to live a godly life and enter a godly marriage. And so I had to take all of the stress and the fighting with my parents. And then Jacob and I were fighting, and all the stress of trying to plan a wedding and not knowing what to do. And we ran butt heads, really, I guess.
Arguments that we had.
We had so many arguments. So there's this one night in particular, that is the kind of the crux of the story here, is that Jacob lived in a townhouse with some friends of his, and we had gotten into this fight in the living room. And so I'm outside of the house, and I'm pacing up and down the sidewalk in front of his townhouse, and I just get so frustrated, and I whip out a cigarette. And I had not had a cigarette in ages, but we had been fighting so much that I had gone to the store and bought a pack of cigarettes, because the other physical, intimate activity that couples can do to help take the edge off of stress after they're getting over a fight, we couldn't obviously do that either. And so I didn't know how to cope with my stress. I didn't know how to handle this frustration.
You should build up those habits over time that had been...
Well, and so the thing about the smoking, it wasn't even a habit. I hadn't done it in years. And so it wasn't even a habit anymore.
But it's kind of like you remove a primary one, and then that's why your body's like, oh, wait, I remember this thing that I can use. And
the biggest part of it was when you have a fight, but then you get over it, you resolve the fight, you guys come to you forgive each other, and there's this resolution. But then there's still that lingering tension that just needs to leave. Mm-hmm. And that is the thing that I had the hardest time getting over. I couldn't cross. It felt like I couldn't cross the bridge from we've just had a fight to things are okay again. Mm-hmm. And sex is a big thing you can use to cross over that bridge. Mm-hmm. And we couldn't do that. And then, smoking was a big thing that I used to do. That's why it became a coping mechanism, is because I didn't know how to get from one place to the other. And I remember smoking, and I did not do it very often at all at this point in time, because I knew it was wrong. I was convicted every time I did it, and Jacob hated it. Jacob vehemently hated me smoking. And I was but I don't know what to do. And I was so hot-headed that I'm you're going to have to get over it, because I can't do anything else. And so this is the only thing I got. And I remember just having a moment with the Lord, pacing up and down this sidewalk, and I throw my cigarette on the floor and I put it out, And I'm just like frustrated as all get out because here I am sitting here trying to be obedient and not smoke a cigarette, not do anything I'm not supposed to do. And then having to just wrestle with these feelings of I can't cross over from my mad to or better. And I don't know what to do. And I really had to just like yell out to God and be angry with him and at him and towards him and Jacob in order to give those feelings over to God, because there was nothing else for me to do. The only thing that I could do, there was no outlet for me except give it to God. And that is such a valuable lesson to learn in your first year being saved. If you go through that and you learn, hey, the only way that you're really going to get good with any situation in your life is by first going to God with it and continually going to God with it. Like, there are tons of people, I'm sure, who would save themselves so much heartache and headache if that was the default setting. Go to God, continue to go to God, don't stop going to God. He is your answer for every problem in your life.
Yep.
But that situation, as difficult as it was the reason how I got there. And Lord knows, who knows how long it would have taken me to get there if it was not for this confrontation that I only had because we were engaged and trying to live a godly life.
Yeah,
you know,
having those habits confronted with what's correct and true.
Yeah, it's really hard. Like, the whole point of that is that, like, there are these habits that we have that are not godly and they're not conducive to a godly marriage, and they're just not going to come up to the surface until you're placed into that relationship.
Yep.
So we can't catch everything.
The examples you gave were two examples of habits that had formed that you didn't know were necessarily there or were going to be disruptive, and that you were going to have to get rid of. And again, not always as evident is the history and the trauma that you've experienced throughout your young adult life from
your whole life,
through your whole life, but premarital life, that have formed habits. You know, maybe you suffered a trauma and, you know, have like that fight or flight mentality where the habit that's formed is, oh, I'm going to flee, in the sense of intense stress or intense
like an
pain
argument
or something like that. You know, you're used to just, okay, I got to get out of here as fast as possible because I know I'm going to get hurt. Or you shut down and disengage. And that, like, for me, that's what would happen to me, right? As soon as we start having a fight, right, and I feel, you know, I just suddenly start feeling like I'm being attacked. And then I start shutting down, and I don't want to talk anymore. And then I try to give the cold shoulder, and then I'm already in my thoughts at that point. Well, my thoughts, right? And the enemy is, you know, just preying on that and is inserting all sorts of things and trying to get me to think all sorts of things and get me to agree with all sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
And even that the trauma that's been built up is trying to do the same thing.
And the hard part about that for me was that I externally process a lot with you when in a fight, but you were shut down. So you weren't processing back to me.
Mm-hmm. Not giving you the feedback you needed.
No, and then, now granted, I understand, like, I was angry raising my voice, which then triggered you, and so you shut down. But then even later on, when I would be like, okay, no, but seriously, like, I want to help, I want to understand where you're coming from, like, you were still so shut down that you couldn't even, like, break out of it to just, you know, reiterate to me what was wrong with you, you know?
Yeah, so it's identifying things like that, you know, and anger outbursts. Because you can take these things, formulate them as a habit and say, okay, is this something that is reflective of Jesus, right? Is this something that's reflective of who I'm supposed to be and how I'm supposed to behave, right? And if the answer is no, which in most cases it won't be, honestly, right, for these things that are coming to the surface, then that's something that you can focus on changing.
Yeah, and that one of the things we'll hit home with it at the end of the episode is that there's 3 steps that you really have to do when you're in conflict in your marriage and just processing through your marriage. I honestly think there's just 3 main things. Number 1 is lean on God. Number 2 is discern the devil. Number 3 is have grace for your spouse.
Yep.
We already kind of talked in the beginning about leaning on God, and the discerning the devil part right now I wanted to bring up, because if you are with someone like this, right? Like maybe someone like Jacob who shut down, or someone like me who's like hot-headed. Either way, one of you, if not both of you, one of you in this circumstance has to discern the devil. You have to discern, to put some Christianese on it, where the hooks are in your spouse, Where are the points that you know enough about their background or their story that you're like, oh, this could be something that's being triggered right now? Maybe discerning it in yourself, like, okay, I'm angry, but I feel like I'm more angry than I should be. Maybe this is how the devil is using me. And then just keeping your discernment up in general, because if you can see your spouse shutting down or you see your spouse moving in a certain direction, if you kind of see the direction going, the conversation, the argument going in a certain way, you have feelings that are rising up in you, then one of you needs to be the one that uses that discernment and starts to bring things back down. Mm-hmm. Whether that's humbling yourself, swallowing your pride, and being the first one to apologize, whether that's just saying like, hey, hold on, things are getting really heated. Like, we really need to take a step back and take a breath.
Right.
Like,
disengaging the need to be validated or justified. And even if you are right, it's understanding that where your partner is and what's going on is bigger. Yeah,
because somebody needs to be the one that initiates that. And as Jacob and I have been married for a while, we've gotten pretty good at doing this together, where we both kind of recognize, like, okay, as soon as one of us says it, then for the most part, both of us kind of like step back. We're like, okay, because we've done it enough times to know that, like, yeah, we really do need to disengage. We need to take a step back. We need to take a breath. And I can't tell you how many fights that we've had where we are in the throes of it and we are just screaming at each other. And then the Lord just drops something in my mind. And I'm like, whoa. And I have to take a whole step back. And I totally have to eat crow, swallow my pride, do however you want to call it, and be like, okay, the Lord just showed me something. And this is really what the root cause of the problem is. And it's really hard to shift blame from your spouse to the devil. And it's really hard to shift blame when you're attacking in one direction to then switch to a different direction. Or even just to understand that, like, oh, I'm attacking my spouse, but really this problem had to do with this other thing over here. And I need to just disengage from attacking her.
Because that's what the devil wants.
Right.
The devil wants to shift everything, saying, okay, no, it's their fault, right? And it's getting you to fight each other as opposed to fight him.
Yeah, divide and conquer. That's his motto, right? A huge part of it is like discernment. Discerning the devil in these things, discerning yourself, discerning the Spirit of God, the voice of God, of what he's saying, being able to keep that ear open to listen to him. That is fundamental. So that's a huge thing that I really wanted to talk about there, is that discernment part of keeping that.
Yeah. And I think just to tie into the last part of what we want to talk about is having grace for your partner, right? Because these are habits that have formed over a number of years, decades, right? That are being broken, and that can be really hard. Right, there's processes and procedures and things like that your spouse has established.
Yeah. Like I called my dad for everything. My dad is incredible, man. He is super handy. Like, he was a master mechanic. He's retired, but he can. In my mind, he can fix anything. He can do anything. Like, my dad's amazing. But the problem is not calling my dad for advice, because there's plenty of times now in our marriage that Jacob and I will face something. We look at each other like, oh, should we call your dad? And I'm like, yeah. So we do it. The problem is that when we first got married, I would call my dad immediately, right away. I wouldn't even talk to Jacob. I wouldn't even he'd be at work and something would happen. Like, I wouldn't even give you the 411. I would literally just call my dad right away. I wouldn't even go to God first. Like, I literally called my dad straight away. And because that's what I knew, right? Like, that's what I did my whole life, is I just called my dad.
It was just like, oh, hey, I'm going to call my dad.
And from a God perspective, like, that's a really great habit to build of but then of having that pattern of like, oh, I run to my father. If you don't shift that though from your earthly father to your heavenly father, then there's a big disconnect there. Like, that's right. Fathers are supposed to help to portray and show you what that relationship with the father is supposed to be. But like, that paints a really good picture of what I should have done. Just run to God for these things. But I didn't. And I would run to my dad. And Jacob wasn't very handy back then. Like, he really didn't know how to do a lot of stuff in that handyman realm. Incredibly talented and gifted in a wide variety of areas that I could never even touch with like a 29-foot pole. But I was really handy too. So I'm like, no, this is my realm of stuff that I can do and contribute to. And my dad teaches me how to do the things and I do them. So like, I'm just going to do that.
But then
How did that make you feel?
Well, then the outcome of that is me finding out by you telling me or me asking a question about whatever's happened, and then knowing that, okay, well, you called your dad immediately, and like you said, you didn't even give me a chance, and that was it. It was, but I'm your husband now,
Yeah.
and we need to work on these things together.
Yeah.
And even if I don't know, there needs to be communication. There needs to be trust.
You still have the right to know what's going on. My goodness.
It could trigger feelings of betrayal. And it triggered feelings of inadequacy in me, right? And then that inadequacy could change to shutting down and being like, okay, well, I'm just going to be completely uninvolved, right? And I don't want to be involved with this because I know you're just going to call your dad again.
Right. And all that's unhealthy. That needs that was all trauma that had to get worked out. That's all insecurity and stuff that had to get worked out. But these are all the ways, of course, that our relationships can bring these things to the surface, which is why you can't clean all your stuff up before you get married. But one of the things that like I didn't even, so yeah, right. So that springs up these kinds of issues, insecurities and whatever in Jacob. It reveals a flaw in my processing as well. But what it did also reveal that I didn't expect it to reveal was like me having control issues and being impatient. That's so not new. Like I knew that about myself. Like that's, like that's known. Okay. Anyone close in my life knows probably that these are the things that happen. However, I have gotten way better in the control department. I feel like I'm like so vastly improved in my needing for control, like so much. However, I'm still working on the impatience thing, like really a lot. But one of the things that this whole thing revealed was, I will just tell you this very quick story, is that we were preparing to sell our first home. And Jacob and I were going through the list of all the changes that we had to make after the home inspection. And a lot of our outlets in our house were either wiggly and like loose or they were dead. And so they all had to either be tightened or replaced. And the funny thing is that one of the things that we looked for in this home when we bought it originally was Jacob was like, I want a home with a lot of outlets. Because we always were running into this problem at our apartments where we never had an outlet where there needed to be. So we move into this house and we're doing, the tour and we're like, oh my gosh, there's outlets everywhere. Yes. So it was like such a dream. We loved it. Like every wall had multiple outlets. It was fantastic. I'm sure the code was like so not up to code or anything. But anyway, there were so many electrical outlets. So then we're getting ready to sell this house a few years later, and we have all this work to do. So Jacob had a buddy who knows electrician stuff. He comes over and teaches him how to do he replaced how to tighten the sockets and how to completely replace the electrical outlet. He's only there for a little while, teaches Jacob how to do it. They go through the house and test which ones are dead, which ones need to be blah, 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 right? They have their list. I'm like, we're going to have to hire somebody or we're going to have to hire him and whatever. Jacob, I go to bed because I'm just like done. The days are long. The kids were super young. Jacob goes out in the middle of the night, goes to the hardware store. Thank you that Lowe's was open till like 11 o'clock at night. Buys all the stuff that he needs, goes through the house one by one, cutting off the breaker, fixing the outlets, replacing the outlets that need to be replaced throughout the entire house. Poor man doesn't go to bed until 4 o'clock in the morning. So I wake up the next day, probably with a baby. Like, gosh, Jacob, like, what's going on? You're so tired. Like, I need you. And he's like half asleep. And he tells me, he's like, I didn't go to bed till 4 a.m. And he tells me why. And I was just like flabbergasted. I was totally floored. I'm like, you did what? And he had replaced like every outlet, like sneaking into the kids' room with a headlamp on while they're sleeping. Like he had done so much stuff over the course of the night. And it really just floored me. And what it humbled me and taught me immediately was, you know what? If I just backed off and gave him some space to learn how to do a new skill and gave him the space and time to practice and do it, then I would have so many problems in my life that would just go away by my husband doing them that don't require us to call my dad or a handyman or hire someone or anything. And it builds up your confidence and your abilities at the same time.
Yeah. Yep.
Then, just to prove that I am very flawed, fast forward to just like 4 months ago, ish.
Yeah, some yeah.
Yeah. Like spring of 2023, we have a 10 passenger van that has a battery located in a really weird spot. It's underneath the driver's seat. Okay. It's not under the hood, it's underneath the driver's seat. So we do all these tests because the car battery is not working, the car won't start. We try jumping it. It works only for a day, and then the battery just full blown dies. And so it has to be replaced. I knew this when we bought the van. That's how this van functioned. I knew this. So I had already decided back when we bought the van that should this problem, when it ever arises, it will cost us way more money because we'll have to take it to a dealership. It will have to get a full blown job done just to replace the battery. It's not like a Jiffy Lube in and out kind of situation. As soon as it happens, he tells me, I'm like, oh, that's it. Like we have to take it to the dealership. Like, oh my gosh, it's probably going to cost a few $100s. The labor is going to be a lot, blah, blah, blah.
You need to tow it.
Yeah, we'll have to tow it over to the dealership. Like, it's going to be so much money. And I was really kind of freaking out about it. And Jacob's like, I can do it. And I'm like, no, you cannot, because I've read the owner's manual. I know where it is. This thing is crazy. You have to remove a seat. We don't have the right tools. Like, this is way beyond our pay grade. Like, we cannot do this job. He was like, I can do it. Like, it's in the owner's manual. They wouldn't put it in the owner's manual if they didn't actually expect anyone to like have to do this job, okay, themselves. Took me a minute, but I was like, you know what? He has this track record that he has built up over the course of time that if I just shut up and let go of my control issues and give him the space to do it, then he will do it and he'll figure it out. If not, he will have tried everything that he can try, and we'll know that we have to take whatever step we have to take. And Jacob learned that because I had this flaw, he could have more latitude to do these things if it didn't impact me and the family so much, because with 6 kids, we really need to have 2 parents as much as we can for either one of us to be like really happy and cool at the end of the day. And so like, he knows that like, you know, from 2 to 7 p.m. being out in the garage that whole time, like that would have just sent me through the roof. So he knew to wait until I went to bed, but I went to bed. And he went to the auto parts store. He got the things that he needed. He went into a friend's house and borrowed a tool that he needed for the job that was specialized, and then did the whole job. Well, I was sleeping, and then I woke up the next morning and the van was ready to go and it was fixed. I shared this story, 1, just so you guys know that Jacob is in fact awesome. And then 2, because there's a lot of these things like you're catching on that time and intimacy reveal some of these issues that we have. And they reveal these habits maybe that are ungodly that we need to break. They reveal this trauma and these issues that we have. But if we lean on God, if we discern the devil, and if we give grace to our spouse, there really isn't, I don't think, anything in marriage that we can't overcome with those things in mind. And if we keep them at the forefront of our minds while we're in our marriage and practicing, then we're going to be able to have a thriving, joyful marriage.
100%.
You know, that like you can do things, you can accomplish things, you can get somewhere, like achieve your goals that you have with your spouse.
We can function as that 3-strand cord, you know, with God leading the way.
Yeah.
Having the time and space to be able to accomplish something and doing that self-learning, like, okay, I can learn this and I can do this, can work to the benefactor, but it also can be a bane as well.
Yeah.
For me, it was, I want to be able to do all the things. I want to do the handiwork. I want to be able to learn. I want to be able to do it, right? I don't want you to do it without me, right? And that was my own letting go of control, because there'd be certain points of time where I'd come home and you'd have done something and I'd be like, well, I wanted to do that. And now I'm upset and I'm going to start getting in my feelings because I'm upset, right? And that it feels like you robbed me of that opportunity, right? You robbed me of the ability for me to show off, like, I'm the husband, I can do things, you know, I'm Mr. Fix-It, right? Even though, you know, I wasn't Mr. Fix-It. Yeah. You know, and I was still learning that.
It's that same insecurity.
Yeah. And for me, it's working on my end is I had to humble myself and it's like, no, you have the capacity to be able to pick up something and learn something and do something, and me getting away from, I have to do all of it. I don't have to do all of the hammering, you know, of putting something together, realizing that if I give you the time and the space that you need to be able to do something, that you'll accomplish it as well. it becomes I'm trying to take on the world, and I need to have all these burdens on me because
Right.
I have
You
to.
have to be the
I
one
have
that
to be
does
the
it.
one that does all of it. It's like no, we can work together as a team, and then you can do it too. I can actually take some of this stuff and say, okay, well, this needs to be done and this needs to be done. Or you can say, well, I can do this, or I think I just need to call my dad and he can help me out. And it's getting into those where, okay, I may have other things going on more pressing that I want to deal with, and be like, well, sure, if you can call your dad and figure this out, great. I can go focus on something else.
Yeah.
Right? I can go do something else. I can do the thing maybe I wanted to go do something else really badly, but then there was this emergency thing, and you're like, oh no, I'll handle it. I'll be able to do it. And it's me stepping back and saying, okay, I know that you can. Right? Is knowing that you are capable, that you are capable of doing these things, being handy, right, or whatever the task may be, and I don't have to take on that thing. I can relinquish that control and delegate, as it were, to you.
Yeah, because that's control issues that you have on that side of
Maybe not delegate's not a good word, but give those things.
just allow me to do it.
Allow you to do it instead of forcing myself to do it.
Yeah, because a lot of that handy stuff,
pushing
I
you
am
away.
good at it. I'm very good at doing handy things, but also there are things like that I enjoy doing. Like, you know, I enjoy doing certain things like that. There are certain projects that I'm like, yeah, like I find pride in, you know, whipping out some paint and painting a room and hanging
I do
a
not
shelf.
like painting. I think some of that too. It's funny to tie on to that story is but before the communication occurred, right? I'd come home from work when we were at the apartment. I'd come home from work and a wall would be painted a different color, and I'm like, but I didn't even know that you were going to paint. And how much? And then, of course, back then it's like, oh, how much did that paint cost, right? Because we didn't have a lot of money.
Nah, I got the little sample paints at the store that someone mixed, like a little baby quart of paint.
I don't want this.
Yeah, it only cost me like $3.
But it's like, you didn't communicate to me. You didn't get my input, right? But then,
and this is the point of the
fast
story.
forward, it's like, you want to paint a wall? Go for it. Paint a wall. If it makes you happy and it makes the home look better, I trust your taste. I trust your skill.
Well, then there's a part of it that's like letting your spouses have their outlets, right? That they have. Like, that's a creative outlet.
Well,
for me.
yeah. You know, it's like, well, I wanted to paint the wall green because, you know, XYZ. I'm like, okay, sure. You know, and then setting the boundaries around that, right? It's like, okay, you know, we have a limited window when that can occur, so the kids don't get their handprint. You know,
things are so much easier back in the day.
All this stuff, right? So, but just to say that was kind of a funny callback.
I painted a lot of walls. Yes. Anyway, thank you guys for being here and for the episode. We really hope that this
blesses you.
Yeah, and that there's something from it that you can take away and either apply to your marriage and your relationship,
or your preparations for marriage.
Yeah, or even look back on those times. Maybe you've been married for a long time, and you know you can look back on that and like retroactively give your spouse some grace. You know, maybe some of these things can shed some light on, you know, one of the things we talked about, like those fights that we had, they're reoccurring fights, you know, and there's something to be said about paying attention to those reoccurring fights in your marriage and getting to the bottom of them.
Yeah. So if you've got comments, feedback, you know, you want to provide some insight, or, you know, you liked what you heard, then,
you know, email connect@the7fold.com, and we'd love to hear that feedback. We're going to try and get our episodes up on YouTube. They'll still be audio only. They're not going to be video. But if you have one for this episode, I don't know if we'll be able to on YouTube for this one, but check it out and leave us a comment there. Or leave us a comment on any one of our videos over at youtube.com/@the7fold. That's our ministry channel. The show notes of this episode have all of our links to our website if you wanted to donate to the show, our YouTube channel, our social media handles, all that stuff is linked in the episode description for this show. So you can find that wherever you're listening. And if you would screenshot your phone while you're listening to this and share it online, tag us at the Sevenfold Ministries on Facebook and Instagram, share it with a friend. That would just be really awesome.
Yes.
We would love to see you guys enjoying the show and hear what you guys have to say.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. Go live radical.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
This episode has been made possible by our generous viewers and audience members just like you. If you'd like to donate to the show to keep our ministry running and growing, producing more shows just like this one, please head to thesevenfold.com/partners to donate there. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Radical Direction. Until next time, go live radical.